Coming up on Colonial Crossfire. The Democratic debate. Chaos in the House of Representatives. And Russia enters the Syria conflict. Joining us on the left, Martin McSherry. On the right, Brandon Whitehill. And I'm your moderator, Andrew Desiderio. This is Colonial Crossfire. The Democratic candidates had their first chance to make their case to the voters this week. Who won, who faltered, and is the field finally set, or should we still expect a late entry? Welcome to Colonial Crossfire. I'm Andrew Desiderio. 5 Democrats vying to be their party's 2016 nominee took to the debate stage in Las Vegas. But what happened in Vegas certainly didn't stay there. Frontrunner Hillary Clinton was the obvious standout, and Bernie Sanders scored even more political points with progressives. But who else helped their case, if anyone? Is this race Hillary Clinton's to lose? And will Clinton's strong debate performance discourage Vice President Joe Biden from entering the race? Here to analyze that and more, our student panel. On the left, Martin McSherry, a junior from New York majoring in political communication. Martin is the campaign director for the GW College Democrats and clerked for the Democratic side of the House Benghazi Committee. On the right, Brandon Whitehill, a sophomore from Philadelphia majoring in international affairs and minoring in economics. Brandon is the political affairs director of the GW Young America's Foundation and works for the Rand Paul campaign and Students for Rand here on campus. Thanks to both of you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Democratic candidates Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, Martin O'Malley, Jim Webb, and Lincoln Chafee sparred over everything from gun control to trade policy, Wall Street reform, capitalism, and yes, those pesky emails. It was not unexpected, but Sanders said what Clinton supporters wish they could have been saying for months.
Let me say something that may not be great politics, but I think the Secretary is right. And that is that the American people are sick and tired of hearing about your damn emails.
Thank you. Me too. Me too.
You know?
So Martin, why doesn't Bernie Sanders go after Hillary Clinton over her email server in the same way as, say, Lincoln Chafee has?
Because this is a race about issues that matter, not theatrics like the Republican Party. They have an 11-person circus with their own ringleader, Donald Trump, who insults women, minorities, says terrible things about immigrants, and we're talking about issues and substance, and we're being constructive about it. So this isn't about tearing each other down. We have a unified front. We have different disagreements about policy, but ultimately this is going to be a constructive and positive campaign, and whoever the winner is will go into the general election all the more stronger for it.
Brandon, do you think Bernie Sanders gave what some are considering a political gift to Hillary Clinton by saying a line like that?
You could say that. I mean, Hillary Clinton obviously has a threat on the part of Bernie Sanders, and by him coming in and putting themselves above this whole email scandal, I think that does help them because they have so much support in the Democratic Party right now. But I don't necessarily think it was all just substance, let's debate the issues. I think Bernie Sanders already is very popular. You see it on social media, you see it among young people here on college campuses. Lincoln Chafee, on the other hand, has to put his name out there, has to get himself somewhere. So that was more of a tactical thing, I think. It would have looked petty if Bernie Sanders had done that.
On that note, Martin, as a Democrat, do you agree that Hillary Clinton won the debate, and do you think any other candidates helped their cause?
Well, she won the debate, but not at the expense of Bernie. Do you know what I mean? No one calls each other stupid in the Democratic Party. We talk about ideas. So the real winners is the Democratic Party. This was a huge advertisement for us, and a record-breaking 15 million people watched it. So I couldn't be happier about that. And again, the grown-ups took the stage.
Yeah, so Brandon, the DNC chairwoman, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, has been asked plenty of times about Bernie Sanders' electability and whether he can, A, win the Democratic nomination, and B, even become president with the socialist tag on him. What do you think about that?
Well, I think he could potentially win the Democratic nomination. I think that would only happen if the investigations and the scandal around Hillary Clinton intensify. If she continues to perform as she did last night, she'll be the nominee. I don't think there's a question about that. I think he has a slight chance of winning the Democratic nomination. That being said, even if he did win it, absolutely no chance of winning the general election. I mean, people are not willing to vote for someone who rejects capitalism. I don't know which label he prefers, socialist, democratic, socialist. I don't know if it makes a huge difference, but someone who rejects capitalism so openly. I don't think he has a chance.
Do you think it says something about today's Democratic Party, about the fact that they were even debating capitalism in the first place?
I think it's really problematic. You look back to the debates in 2007 and 2008, and these candidates, Senator Obama at the time, Senator Clinton, went out of their way to say, I'm not going to redistribute wealth. I'm not a socialist. And now you have people openly saying that, and Hillary Clinton saying, we're going to make the wealthy pay for it, which I don't know if she includes herself in that because she's pretty wealthy.
She does.
But yeah. But I think
her.
I think it's problematic because that's not how the average American voter thinks.
Martin, what do you think of that?
Well, what it says about the Democratic Party is that we're having a discussion about big ideas. We're not insulting each other based on appearance. We're talking about things that matter. It says that we're in touch to the working American who cares about social programs like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, who relies on those programs and who sees their wages stagnating. I agree with Hillary Clinton personally. I think we need to save capitalism from itself from time to time to rein in the excesses of capitalism. But Bernie Sanders is not Kim Jong-un. This is democratic socialism. He wants to mimic some policies from Scandinavian countries that, on the whole, are broadly popular among most Americans.
I want to pivot to someone who was not on the debate stage, Vice President Joe Biden. Former Obama advisor David Axelrod said that he thinks Clinton's strong debate performance really complicates the rationale for a late entry on Joe Biden's part. Martin, do you think the vice president will and should get into the race?
We always have room for Joe. We really do. The vice president is a beloved figure with tremendous experience. He would bring a lot to the race. But he does look at the debate and see we have a lot of really qualified, tremendous candidates in the race. And Bernie and Martin O'Malley are tremendous alternatives to Hillary Clinton. And, you know, Jim Webb and Lincoln Chafee were sort of like YouTube ads that I wanted to skip through during the debate. But, you know, we have a great set of candidates. Again, always room for Joe. This is a very personal decision for him. And I hope he decides what's best for him.
Brandon, do you think the vice president will jump in?
I think he should. I think there's certainly room for him on that stage. I mean, 5 candidates versus the 15 that we have now. People love Joe Biden. They want to hear from him. I mean, and he does have the experience as vice president. That being said, I don't think he will, because you saw in all the commentary leading up to the debate, you know, Hillary Clinton's unfavorability is rising, poll numbers dropping. Are we going to have Joe come in and remedy the situation? But I think she showed that she had a grip on the front-runner status.
She crushed it.
Martin, you might see that there's, of course you've noticed that there's some internal strife within the DNC about whether to limit the number of debates or extend the number of debates. What do you think about that? Should the party host more than 6 debates?
Yeah, we need more. It's free advertising. People watch it and love it. Again, the highest rating Democratic debate before this was 10 million people. 15 million people watched it on Tuesday, and I think that, again, that's really good for the Democratic Party because they hear us talking about immigration reform. They hear us talking about raising the minimum wage, protecting Planned Parenthood, women's rights, and ultimately making our country greater than any of the Republicans ever could.
Brandon, why do you think the DNC has been limiting the number of debates and is only sanctioning 6?
Originally, I think we all expected this to be a coronation for Hillary Clinton, and that has kind of really devolved from its original expectation. So I think they're still kind of catching up with how popular Bernie Sanders has become, the fact that more people did choose to get in, Martin O'Malley, Jim Webb, Lincoln Chafee, possibly Joe, as we just talked about. So I think they were really unprepared and they're hesitant to change because they don't know what that could end up doing to the race.
And quickly, guys, Anderson Cooper, how did he do?
The Silver Fox, as always, crushed it. Love him. Again, it was a really good debate in sharp contrast to the Republican debates.
Brandon.
I think he was brilliant. I think that he really pushed them hard, and I think he said it best when he said Hillary will say anything to get elected.
That was a question.
I have a feeling you guys will disagree on that, but okay. Thank you so much. And we got 5 more of those coming. We'll be back with more panel debate in just a moment, but first we'll send it over to G Week anchor Mary Grace Braun for a look at what's ahead on G Week next week. Mary Grace?
Thanks, Andrew. Coming up next week on G Week, we talked to one member from the GW Alternative Breaks program to get an exclusive insight into the international community service trips, which allow GW students to make a difference beyond the borders of the district. And GW classrooms are the place for innovation and creativity, but with the lack of funding, some departments can't support programs that are meaningful to students. We will have more details on GW's recent announcement to lay off staff members of the creative writing program. Also, get an inside look at the action and excitement of Colonial Invasion, which brings together the GW community to kick off basketball season and Parents Weekend. Tune in next week, right here on GW TV, for all of these stories and more. Andrew?
Thanks, Mary Grace. Coming up after the break, we'll ask our panel who should be the next Speaker of the House after the House Majority Leader bowed out of the race. Are Republicans in disarray? Stay with us.
It's been pretty busy around here with parcel and flex plans going on sale, so we need an extra pair of hands around the office.
Let's go G-Dub! Let's go G-Dub!
We had no idea you were bringing the Colonial Army.
Whoosh! G-Dub! G-Dub!
Hey George, I think you have an update for Firefox. Never mind.
Wonderful academic institution with a fine athletic tradition.
Patricio Garino throws it down with two hands.
Wonderful city. It's a great place to go to school.
Keith and Savage open down the right side. Will go and Duncan with his right hand.
Not just a family, it's a whole community.
Armwood Duncan with 1.9 seconds left. Armwood, a thunder slam. 81-80 George Washington. A huge victory for the Colonials.
Welcome back. The House of Representatives spiraled into chaos when House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy unexpectedly dropped his bid to become the next Speaker of the House. John Boehner, who announced last month that he would resign the speakership and his congressional seat at the end of the month, is rumored to be considering staying on board until the House GOP can find its leader. Many Republicans are urging Paul Ryan to throw his hat into the ring, but the 2012 vice presidential nominee has been reluctant to embrace that support.
The fact is, Paul Ryan is the right man right now. He has moderate support, and he very clearly has conservative support. Members of the Freedom Caucus have come to me one after another saying, let Paul know we would be with him. That's a very good sign after the strained relations that John Boehner has had with that same caucus.
So Brandon, can Republicans unify around a candidate in time for Boehner's exit?
I think it's possible, yeah. I think when Paul Ryan decides whether or not he will run for Speaker, you're going to see a big shift there. You know, the House Freedom Caucus has officially endorsed Daniel Webster. If you do not see Paul Ryan run, I think you're going to continue to see them endorse Daniel Webster, try to push him. Jason Chaffetz will stay and try and push himself. But if Paul Ryan does get in, you're going to see the Freedom Caucus members happy to endorse him, as well as the moderates and the conservatives and the establishment as well.
Right. Jason Chaffetz, who's currently in the race, has said that he would bow out if Paul Ryan threw his hat into the ring. So you would support Paul Ryan as Speaker?
I personally would, yeah. Okay. I mean, the one condition to that is I'd love to see Paul Ryan be president one day, and I think Paul Ryan would love to see Paul Ryan be president one day.
Right.
And that's definitely factoring into his decision as we speak right now.
Martin, Chris Christie, for his part, has said that this is all political media hype, and it doesn't matter who's Speaker. What do you think about that?
No, the Speaker matters. You're third in line to the presidency. You choose whatever bill comes to the floor. And the truth is, if Republicans can't govern themselves, how are they expected to govern the entire country? This is a great preview to what you might see if we put Republicans in charge. It's chaos, it's turmoil. It very much resembles their primary, in sharp contrast to ours again. And this is we're coming to the end of some of the least productive sessions of Congress in history, as millions of Americans are crying out for immigration reform, again, for a higher minimum wage, for protections that help the most vulnerable among us, and they can't get anything done, and it's their responsibility to do it. And so, yes, the Speaker matters. They need to solve this and solve it fast.
Brandon, on that note, what do you think it says about the House GOP right now that the Freedom Caucus has such a big grip on the party right now?
Well, turmoil and chaos, those are some strong words. I mean, you look around the world today and you see some countries that are really in turmoil and chaos, and it looks a little bit different than what our House of Representatives is right now. But I think the House Freedom Caucus is rooted in ideals. As you were talking about, the Democrats are talking about ideas, they're talking about the things the American people want to hear. And the Freedom Caucus is talking about what brought the Republicans to their majority in the first place. Limited government, stopping executive amnesty, Obamacare, and a true fidelity to the Constitution, which is what every elected leader puts their hand on a Bible and swears to uphold.
And they haven't gotten it done in 5 years.
And they're growing much larger than they have, and they've clearly factored into John Boehner's decision to exit the speakership, which is something that lots of conservatives praise, and Kevin McCarthy's decision to not take on the role of Speaker of the House. So I think they've been pretty successful in getting their ideas out there, and I think whoever the next Speaker will be is going to be someone who is checked by this idea that Republicans who are electing the majority of Congress in historic proportions want more limited government and want fidelity to those ideals.
Martin, why do you think Kevin McCarthy backed out? Do you think it had anything to do with his comments about the House Benghazi Committee, in which he connected Hillary Clinton's falling poll numbers to the work of the committee?
Yeah, well, of course it does. He seems like a reasonable human being, and it's hard to defend the Benghazi Committee as a reasonable human being. So he backed out because no one wants this job. No one wants to preside over people who want to shut down the government, over defunding the largest provider of women's health care in the country. No one wants to preside over people who don't want to govern and who want to grind the gears of government to a halt. So as you can see, no one really wants this job. You know, Kevin McCarthy, I worked on the Benghazi committee. Kevin McCarthy said what we all know. They've wasted $4.5 million trying to prosecute Hillary Clinton just for political purposes. It's a partisan witch hunt, and we all know it.
Brandon, what do you think about the Benghazi committee?
All right, well, 2 points on that. The first point about grinding the gears of government to a halt, or what you said, the person who's responsible for government shutdowns when it comes time to pass a budget is President Obama, because the way budgets used to be passed is the committees would discuss the issues that were important to them. The Agriculture Committee would discuss farm subsidies and things like that, and so on. And they'd all vote on appropriations and things like that. Then they'd go to the House floor and they'd vote line item, and then they'd pass a budget and it would be signed. But President Obama has said that he's not going to sign budgets that are like that. He wants it all in one neat bundle, which has given us the continuing resolution and the omnibus bills. And so when we come to wanting to defund something or alter some program, you need a 60-vote majority in the Senate, you need supermajorities in the House. It used to be that you needed supermajorities and filibuster-proof majorities to pass something, to get it funded, which is Congress's power of the purse in the first place. But President Obama has completely usurped that process and caused, when we have a serious issue to discuss, like these videos that have come out with Planned Parenthood, it's completely impossible to get one part of our budget to debate that and to defund it without shutting down the government. So that's a process that President Obama has encouraged.
Representing the American people who love Planned Parenthood.
The American people do not want one huge bundle of budget. They like responsibility. People are fiscally responsible.
They don't want to shut down the government over defunding Planned Parenthood.
Okay, a large minority who wears pink on the streets likes Planned Parenthood.
I love pink.
Yeah, okay. Well, that being said, the second point about Benghazi was what Kevin McCarthy said was absolutely stupid. We can agree on that. But what he was trying to do, it's not true, what he was trying to do is show why he's qualified to be the Speaker of the House and say, well, here's what was created under my leadership as the majority leader, and this is what it's done. And he's tried to create some advantage. Oh, look, we took down Hillary Clinton. Well, that's not really true, because he really doesn't have any qualification to lead the House Republicans.
Martin, I want you to respond to that, and I also want you to answer as to whether you believe, with a new speaker, the dynamic inside the House will actually change. Say it's Paul Ryan or anyone else. Will it change?
No, it's not going to change. John Boehner's a pretty capable person, but no one can really govern this ungovernable, chaotic, raucous caucus. And you know what? The American people do not want to shut down the government again over Planned Parenthood. They don't even want to defund Planned Parenthood as it is, just as a standalone bill, let alone shut down the entire government over it. So you have a Republican Party that's completely out of touch with what normal, everyday Americans want. They don't want to shut down the government over getting rid of the largest provider of women's health care in the country. And it's only going to hurt Republicans if they do that.
All right, guys, we'll definitely see what happens. We should get at least a glimpse into what Paul Ryan is thinking sometime next week. It should be interesting. After this break, it's rapid fire. Stay with us.
Nearly 16 million people visit Washington, D.C. every year. Some come to witness, some to be heard. We come to make an impact, to learn from leaders, and to lead others. To create and create change. We are the George Washington University. We come to make history.
The George Washington University, at the intersection of policy, practice, and research, connecting all that Washington has to offer with an intellectual environment that drives progress, transforming vision into action, offering learning experiences that are rigorous, real-time, and real-world. In a city shaping the future, George Washington is a place where faculty and students don't just study the world, they work to change it.
Welcome back. Our panel joins us again for rapid fire, some quick answers to some quick questions. Donald Trump has been the frontrunner for the Republican presidential nomination since his announcement this summer. Brandon, do you think Trump has hit a ceiling in terms of his support?
I hope so. I think he has, though. If you look on the Real Clear Politics average, he's been on a dip. It hasn't been going back up for him. You see other candidates starting to catch up with him. I think people are coming to their senses and saying, we're done with the reality television star in this race. We're ready to put out a candidate who's going to, bring this country back to the conservative principles that the majority of this country believe in.
Martin, what say you?
How many times have we thought the GOP would wisen up and get rid of this demagogue? And how many times have we been wrong? He denigrated veterans, made fun of prisoners of war, made countless sexist and racist comments, and the GOP is eating it up. So I think he's going to stick around for a while, and I think that's going to help us out.
From one surging candidate to another, Republican presidential candidate Ben Carson has found himself in hot water recently for comments he made in response to the campus shooting in Oregon. Carson said if he had been in a similar situation, he would have done more to confront the shooter. He also claimed Hitler would never have come to power had the Jews been armed. Brandon, did Carson go too far with these remarks?
People get uncomfortable when Carson say these things, and by people I mean the mass media is like, oh, how could you say these things? But he doesn't care about the political correctness that entraps the conversation. And so I would love for someone to argue that if the Jews or anyone in Germany had been armed, that Hitler would have been able to be as powerful as he was. So I think what he's saying is true. It's just so out of the box that people get all up in arms about it. But I mean, argue against him then.
Martin?
I mean, I will. I've had enough of this victim blaming on the right, be it victims of gun violence, sexual assault, or the Holocaust, for Jesus Christ's sake. I mean, you can't say these things, but again, it's not going to hurt him. It's only going to help him in the Republican primary, and it's only going to help Democrats in the general election.
All right, transitioning to a more lighthearted topic. The Major League Baseball playoffs are well underway. Martin, who do you think will be crowned World Series champions this October?
I'm from New York. Hillary's from New York. She crushed it. I think the Mets are going to crush it, and I think we're gonna win.
All right, Brandon?
I've been hearing some unlikely predictions for the Chicago Cubs, so I'll say them.
Ooh, a Cubs-Mets NLCS. That should be an interesting one. All right, thank you so much, guys. And with that, we end our debate here on Colonial Crossfire. Thank you to both Martin and Brandon for joining us.
Thank you.
Russian President Vladimir Putin began deploying airstrikes in Syria, and he insists that his goal with the new bombing campaign is to help eliminate ISIS, while at the same time propping up his ally, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Many are concerned that the bombing campaign has resulted in a proxy war between the U.S. and Russia, and some reports indicate that Russian jets are deliberately targeting U.S.-trained ground forces. Additionally, as Russia's involvement in the region has continued to escalate, the Pentagon announced it was suspending its efforts to arm and train Syrian rebels, the same forces that have been fighting Assad for nearly 5 years. The program was widely viewed as a failure, and Republicans say it's another example of President Obama's failed leadership in the region. But Obama rejected the idea that Putin is demonstrating stronger leadership. The president has said it would take time to degrade and destroy ISIS, but many fear that he just doesn't have the right strategy. Earlier, I spoke with Elliott School of International Affairs professor Robert Ortung about Russia's involvement in the region. Dr. Ortung, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
President Obama has said that Vladimir Putin's actions in Syria are not a reflection of poor leadership on the part of the United States. I want to play that clip real quick for you and get your reaction.
Okay.
Mr. Putin had to go into Syria not out of strength but out of weakness, because his client, Mr. Assad, was crumbling, and it was insufficient for him simply to send them arms and money. Now he's got to put in his own planes and his own pilots.
So what do you make of that?
Well, I think that Obama was talking about the situation in Syria on one hand, but on the other hand, I think when he's talking about Putin's weakness, what he really has in mind is the situation at home. And I think everything in Russia's foreign policy is driven by what's happening domestically. And I think when Obama said that Putin is weak, he was talking about the Russian economy, the fact that Russia hasn't done very well in pursuing its campaign in Ukraine, and Putin needed to change the topic. And so that's why Putin went in.
Do Putin's actions in Syria reflect or expose a foreign policy failure on the part of the United States?
No, I don't think so, because I think basically what Obama's policy in Syria is to keep America out of the conflict. And in that sense, his policy has been a success. I think Russian action there, though, is Putin is trying to defend the idea that any dictator of any country has the right to do whatever he wants. And so when, as Obama pointed out, the Syrian regime is starting to collapse, Putin felt like it was necessary for him to come in and defend his colleague.
I want to put up a graphic on the screen which shows basically where Russia is targeting. In the red part, you can see where ISIS is. And it looks like they're more targeting the yellow part, which shows where the rebel-controlled parts of Syria are. So are there holes in Mr. Putin's argument when he says he's trying to fight ISIS, when he's clearly aiming at the rebel targets?
Well, Putin is not telling the truth, obviously. His main goal is not to weaken ISIS. His main goal is to prop up Assad, as Obama correctly pointed out. And so that sort of shows that what Putin's thinking about is not the overall situation in Syria, but the defense of the idea that a dictator who's ruling his country has a right to do whatever he wants. And so that plays very well at home in Russia, and it plays well in the sense that Russia is standing up for its rights to defend itself from outside intervention.
So does this complicate the fight against ISIS?
It does complicate the fight against ISIS because it makes it very difficult for the U.S. and its other Arab allies to operate in Syria freely the way they had in the past.
There have been reports that Russia is deliberately targeting U.S.-trained ground forces in the region. So has this become sort of a proxy war between the U.S. and Russia, if that is true?
Yeah, well, for a long time now, Putin's been saying that that Russia's been fighting the United States. For example, he blamed the whole revolution in Ukraine and the subsequent fighting there as a tactic of the U.S. to try and assert its influence in Ukraine. So in order to prop up his own popularity at home, Putin has long used this argument that Russia is basically at war with the United States. And so it's not surprising that Russia is again testing our defenses, testing how far he can go against U.S. interests by bombing the troops on the ground that the U.S. had armed.
So how do you think Mr. Putin's actions in the region will now affect the relationship between the U.S. and Russia, which is already pretty strained?
I think the relationship's only going to get worse. And so I think we'll see even less talk among Kerry and Lavrov, our two foreign ministers, trying to negotiate some kind of arrangement between the U.S. and Russia. I don't really see much of a relationship at all. And that's also predicated on the fact that we don't really have much of a trade relationship with Russia. We don't buy anything from them. They don't really buy anything from us. It's different for the Europeans who are more involved, but we don't really have much going on with them.
Last week, the Pentagon ended a really controversial program that they were arming and equipping the Syrian rebels that a lot of people in the Pentagon had admitted was a failure. Should the U.S. have had a more targeted strategy and armed the rebels earlier than they did?
Well, I think the U.S. doesn't have much of an interest in Syria. I mean, the only reason we started getting involved there was after the Arab Spring, where some groups tried to overthrow President Assad. And otherwise, I think the main U.S. interest after our engagement in Iraq and Afghanistan is to stay out of another foreign conflict that could just become a quagmire for U.S. troops.
Do you think Russia will come to regret this?
I do think they will come to regret this because I don't think that the Russian people support Russian military intervention in Syria in the same way that the American people don't support sending American boots on the ground in Syria either. So I think, but the difference is, of course, that the Russian media is completely controlled by President Putin, and so he doesn't have to worry about critical journalists pointing out, what's going right, what's going wrong with their military campaign. So he controls the conversation in Russia, and he's instilling in Russians a fear of terrorism. He's saying that the Russian state is protecting Russians against terrorism, and he's trying to use that as a way to shore up his popularity at home.
Did President Obama's Red Line proclamation from a couple years back, did that cost the U.S. some leverage in the region?
Yeah, it made us look stupid. But, the basic point was that Obama's not going to get involved. And so he kind of went too far. He got a little bit ahead of himself in his statements, but then he tried to pull it back as quickly as he could and stuck with the main policy, which is not get involved, which is what he did.
Do you think it's dangerous that the U.S. and Russia are operating militarily in such close proximity to each other right now?
Yes, the Russians have been doing a lot of provocations all along the borders with NATO in terms of the Baltic Sea, all along the Ukrainian border, and now in Syria they've been sending planes over Turkey. I think one of their drones was shot down this morning, apparently. So they've been doing a lot of provocations along these lines, and so that's very dangerous because it could lead to a situation where we end up shooting down one of their planes, or they might end up shooting down one of our planes that's trailing one of their planes. So that's a very unstable situation.
So will it drag the fight against ISIS further into the future, further than many people in the U.S. would like?
Right. I think that this conflict is not going to be resolved. I mean, obviously there's been conflict in the Middle East for a long time, and so that's not going to go away. And it seems that it's only getting more intense.
So it's something that the next president will have to deal with, basically.
Absolutely.
All right. Dr. Orton, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate the time.
My pleasure.
My thanks to Dr. Robert Ortung. When we come back, Casey Decker has our debate fact check.
I believe. I believe that.
I believe that we.
I believe that we will win.
It's been pretty busy around here with parcel and flex plans going on sale, so we need an extra pair of hands around the office.
Let's go G-Dub! Let's go G-Dub!
We had no idea you were bringing the Colonial Army.
Whoosh! G-Dub! G-Dub!
Hey, George, I think you have an update for Firefox. Never mind.
Welcome back. During our panel discussion, a team of fact-checkers monitored our debate. Casey Decker is here to fill us in on what we missed. Casey?
Thanks, Andrew. Well, first we'll go to our liberal debater, Martin, who said that the House Speaker is third in line to the presidency. The Speaker of the House is actually second in line, with the Vice President, of course, being first. Then, our conservative debater, Brandon, said that the Republican majority in Congress is growing in historic proportions. That may be true, as the last time the Republicans controlled such a large percentage of Congress was 1929. That being said, from the party's founding in the 1850s until 1929, there were several Congresses with much larger GOP majorities than the current one. That's it from the fact check desk. And Andrew, I'm curious, who's your pick for the World Series?
Ooh, it's not the Phillies, that's for sure. Thanks, Casey. And now for Spilled Milk. Here's our tribute to the very best of late-night political comedy.
Today, my love has gone away. The bottle stands so long, the symbol of the dawn.
The story begins in a house upon a hill, full of spooky skeletons. Skeletons who were covered in organs and flesh and clothing. The people had lost their leader, a haunted tree man with bark for skin. They say you can still hear him roam the halls at night crying, and no one knows why.
Obama says the U.S. spent $500 million to train just 5 fighters in Syria. That's $100 million each. Where are we getting these guys? Whole Foods?
In last night's debate, presidential hopeful Jim Webb repeatedly complained that he wasn't being given enough attention, while Lincoln Chafee repeatedly complained that there wasn't any bird seed on stage like he was promised.
Ben Carson commented on the recent mass shootings, saying he never saw a body with bullet holes that was more devastating than taking away gun rights. Dr. Carson, be honest. Was your medical degree given sarcastically? I'm starting to think you're less of a real brain surgeon and more of a real brain surgeon.
Look, stuff happens. There's always a crisis. And the impulse is always to do something, and it's not necessarily the right thing to do.
That's leadership. Not necessarily doing anything. Follow me, everyone. Where are we going? Right where we are.
All right, well, that's all for this episode of Colonial Crossfire. For all the latest updates from our political team at any time, be sure to follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook. For all of us here at GWTV, I'm Andrew Desiderio. Thanks for getting caught in the crossfire with us. We'll see you right back here next time.